Hey everybody, Roy Rogers here from the Second Sons and the White Book, back again with one of those how and the why of it videos. Today, I had promised in the past that I was going to do Stark Cohor, but the thing is, the meta has shifted since the last time I did one of these deck tech / deck explanation videos, and that means that Stark Cohor, while still very powerful and probably one of the more complicated decks to play, is not the new Stark hotness that's taking over the meta like I honestly thought it should be, and probably still think it kind of should be. Instead, I am going to be talking a little bit about the deck that is literally, in the context of a card game, running over the meta. It is the U.S. champion deck that also has done well across the pond. For example, Steve Ebry did the top six, made it to I think 6th place at Fracas. It did well at Blackwater, and it, of course, came in 2nd place at Gen Con, and that is Stark Crossing. Stark Crossing is the best Stark deck right now in what is probably the most powerful faction. One of the more interesting things about where the meta is sitting right now is that Stark has had so much power creep influxed into it in the last, 3 chapter packs? It's very similar, actually, to the way in which Targ was, I think, at the beginning of Cycle 3. Yeah, because that was the first bestow cycle, right? Yeah. So where it was like Targ was maybe feeling a little underpowered, not as strong as it could be, but it got this influx of really powerful cards. Astapor, Dragon is no Slave, its economy card, and this dropped it from maybe a solid but tier 2 deck or tier 2 house to the top of the meta then, or at least in competition for being at the top of the meta. That is kind of what just happened with Stark. Stark was floating, had a very humiliating beginning of the year at Thrones War, but sort of has been percolating as a very solid tier 2 archetype. Maybe, Rush comes in, then we got some more mid-rangey stuff doing well. It won Craster's, the first big Rookery event, with a sort of no-fun archetype of sort of very mid-rangey, and then it had a better showing at Jesse's event, but still sort of percolating just under the surface of the most competitive level of decks. Well, then they printed a really strong economy card, a really strong draw card, and a really strong action advantage card in the form of Northern Armory, House Manderley Escort. We'll find out in a minute when I bring up the deck list. And then, of course, Wyman Manderley, who is both, of course, card draw and action advantage. And now the question then for people is, what is going to be the best archetype to play out of the Stark? So Stark got amazing cards. Its biggest problem that was probably holding it back for a long time was economy, and now its economy problems are relatively solved. Now Stark decks are still pretty greedy, and that's actually something we'll talk about when we get into talking about the deck that we'll be featuring, which is of course going to be Dustin Archer's winning deck from U.S. Nationals, plus I'll talk a little bit about Stephen Ebry / California's Gen Con 2nd place deck, and so so Stark's economy issues are somewhat fixed, and then of course its other big problem was draw, which was been definitely fixed. So the question is, what would these new tools do? And for a long time, I would have bet that Cohor would have been the breakout, because Cohor in Stark really just cranks the no fun package up and just basically says, look, I'm going to be already decks are in the sort of meta running up to in the summer meta. I think I said this in a previous video about Greyjoy and about Martell and about Tyrell. Increasingly, the meta was moving towards these mid-range decks that had some kind of combo finisher that could gain power really, really fast. It wasn't about gaining power really, really fast at the beginning of the game, although if that happened, that's great. But it was sort of going to plot 2, plot 3, plot 4, usually around plot 3 to 5, and solidifying board control, and then comboing your opponent out with rapid power gain. So that would be Mace, that would be Doran's Game, that would be like a Drown God strategy out of Greyjoy, or those kind of things, right? So, and then Targ, of course, which was another big important faction, was also playing a mid-range strategy, but a sort of mid-range strategy that led to sort of attritioning your opponent out. And then, of course, you had the Wall, which, while not a mid-range deck, did have some kind of like combo sense of inevitability, which was, of course, the decks moving in the form of inevitability, I guess would be a good way to put it. About half the meta were decks that had some kind of inevitability, either in the form of Mace, the Wall, or Mace, the Wall, or Dorn's Game, which says, look, if you give me enough time, I'm going to win the game. There's just nothing you can do about that. Challenges, they matter, but I'm going to find that critical opening in the form of just wearing you out with the Wall, comboing you down with Mace, or just winning one big intrigue challenge with my ridiculously undercosted Intimidate bodies, and you're kind of screwed. Or Targ, which is like, look, I'm going to wear you out of stuff that to play. Your deck pile is going to be so full of stuff that you just won't be able to do anything. And it seemed to me, at least in this kind of mid-range into sort of a combo finisher meta, that Stark Cohort, this no-fun approach, would be really good. But it's not really necessarily worked out that way. Of course, Bryn won killed in the Kingswood in Philadelphia with a very good field, very strong, but with a Stark Cohort deck. But that ended up being Stark Cohort had almost no presence at Gen Con, which really surprised my team, the Long Lances. We were all concerned about it and teched our deck very hard against it. Instead, what emerged, beginning of Gen Con, and then was really proven, both success in Blackwater, success at Fracas, and now, of course, winning the U.S. Nationals, and, of course, Andras had really big success at the Lord of the Crossing event in New Jersey, and, of course, other tournaments, is Stark Crossing, Stark Rush. And I think now it's about the time to bring up the deck. So let's bring up the deck that was piloted by Dustin Archer to really strong success. And Andras had a top 8 finish with this deck. He came in second with a variant. I don't think he was running this exact list at Lord of the Crossing, but he might have been. But very close. And then, of course, Dustin ended up beating AJ Valle in the finals of U.S. Nationals. And so this is the big Stark Crossing deck. So for you out there, let's just make sure everybody understands what the Lord of the Crossing agenda does. All right, so this agenda, to get a benefit out of it, requires you to do 3 challenges. The first challenge, you initiate each phase. So that means when you're the attacker, each of your participating characters get -1 strength. And then during the third challenge, each of your participating characters gets +2 strength, and if you win the challenge, you gain 1 power for your faction. All right, so that last clause is really what gives the deck its gives all crossing decks, whether they're Targ, whether they're Night's Watch, like Jim Hansen did pilot it into, I think, the top 8. It might have even been the top 4. I think it was the top 4 of U.S. Nationals. It just adds speed. That additional power that if you win the challenge, plus that additional strength, this guarantees that you can win the challenge, just creates so much speed in your deck. And of course, like all Rush decks, this Stark Crossing deck is running a lot of tools to help you claim power really fast. It's running, of course, the neutral one, which is Superior Claim. After you win a power challenge by 5 or more, gain 2 power for your faction. Boom. Usually you'll often, of course, the synergize is really strong with Lord of the Crossing, because if you make it the third challenge, you can easily, even with just 1 character or 2 characters, win a challenge by 5 or more with your opponent's, over even your opponent's defense. Very strong. And then Stark's tools, Winter is Coming, which of course allows you to, it's an action, and you can raise the claim of a challenge on your raise the claim value on your revealed plot card by 1. This 1 cost event. Very strong. You can of course use it the way in which most Stark decks use it, which is for military claim or early intrigue claim to apply pressure, but it's best, I think, in my opinion, on the power challenge. And of course, it can be combined with Superior Claim on a turn 2 or a turn 3 to just claim so much power so fast. So that's kind of the neutral power claim things that are in here. But of course, one of Stark's benefits that they have is, of course, massive amounts of renown. So Stark has, so this deck is running, let's see, that's 1, 2, 3, I'm missing one. I feel like I'm missing one. No, there's three. 3 instances of renown. Oh, wait, she's got to be in here. Where is her? Where is she? Daisy. Oh, Daisy's not in here. Interesting. I could have sworn that I saw him play a Daisy, but I saw a lot. We saw a lot of Stark last Saturday, so I apologize. So there's 3 instances of renown in this deck, and this is of course renown thanks to Robb Stark, who after a Stark character is sacrificed or killed, stand each character, who combos well with, where is he? Wyman Manderley. And he has an action, sacrifice a character. All right, boom. With him, this allows you to get Robb in 2 challenges a turn. It lets you get Eddard in 2 challenges a turn. It has ways of creating additional renown in the form of Septa Mordane, who gives Sansa Stark +2 strength and renown. So where is she? Where's Sansa? Right, which turns Sansa into a monster of 6 strength. So that's an additional 4th instance of renown. Of course, there's Eddard Stark's double renown that he claims power and then gives power to another character. The Blackfish can be in multiple challenges once you get him really going. Just really, really, really strong. And of course, thanks to Northern Armory, which of course has the action kneel Northern Armory to choose and stand a Stark character. You can only use it once since it can't stand, but very powerful. So there's lots of action economy, right, that's tied to this renown. So we have Robb that we already talked about. We just have Wyman himself with his reaction to his sacrifice. So you can sacrifice a character with him, but he also has the reaction. After 1 or more characters you controlled are sacrificed or killed, stand Wyman manually to draw 1 card. The card's amazing, super powerful in a crossing deck, which often has to play a bunch of cards to push an advantage. It wants to draw its things like its superior claims, its winner is Cummings. Very powerful. But the fact that Wyman himself can solo 2 challenges in the form of opening intrigue, stand him up, do a military challenge with somebody, and then do a power challenge, or defend the intrigue challenge, stand him up, and then do a challenge, an intrigue challenge. Of course, up to 3 times, so he could defend an intrigue, a power, and attack, or some other variation of that, depending on what your board state is. And of course, just choose through your board state. But this deck, of course, doesn't necessarily care so much about its board state. It cares about its power. So if you can leverage just the sheer action economy of Wyman. So you have stand from Robb, you have stand from Wyman, you have stand from Northern Armories. All really, really strong. And then, of course, there's also probably the cheeky card, the cheekiest card, which was, I think, made its first major tournament appearance here. This is the Gen Con runner-up deck. This is Matt Woodward's deck, that also Stephen Ebry, that was originated with Jesse Carpenter, is this card right here, I Am No One. Which is an action. Choose a character you control with printed cost 3 or lower. Until end of the phase, that character loses all faction affiliation and traits, gains insight and stealth, and does not kneel when declared as a defender. Alright, so that combos really strongly with Sansa. So if you were watching the U.S. national streams, which myself, Scott Levine, and Matt Gaiman were commenting over, Sansa with I Am No One was the combo of that weekend. It was a combo of Gen Con as well. I saw Matt definitely push through a bunch of stuff with that. This is really powerful because it turns Sansa into particularly in the first turn, turns Sansa into a 4-strength, non-kneeling intrigue military bicon that is stealthing past people, pushing past defenses, and drawing you cards. And of course, if you get Septa Mordane out, she is a 6-strength maximum renown body, and it just creates so much additional speed that's drawing you cards and stealthing past your opponent's threats. So this combo wombo of I Am No One plus Sansa is really powerful. And of course, it can go on any character. It can go on not just any character. It can go on things like Arya to provide the insight. It can go on Bolt and Flare, which, so you can get a military and an intrigue challenge. It can go on an Umber Loyalist if necessary. It can even I've seen it go on Summer or Septa or Maester Lewin. Like, any character is much more powerful. And of course, you have I Am Off to Gold Town, which provides additional support for this I Am No One strategy. So you could turn any I Am No One character into a Tricon with stealth and insight. Super strong. Very, very strong. And it just increases the speed. What I like about this deck as well is that it really goes all in on Greyjoy. So Greyjoy is great because of his Intimidate. So it gives you options. So you can go a sort of more traditional sort of Stark strategy these days, which in Stark Rush strategy these days, which is to go second. And it gives you lots of options with the form of Rob. You can defend a bunch of challenges and then stand your characters up. It gives you an opportunity to respond. Like, a lot of decks are running things like Milks and stuff like that, or even Wards, that you want to be able to plan your challenges phase about knowing around what your opponent's going to do. So going second is very powerful. If your Wyman or your Rob is milked, you want to know that going into the challenges phase while you're planning it out. Going second gives you that option. It can also protect you if you're going to play some of these fatties like Rob or Wyman. So going second is strong. But Greyjoy gives these Stark Rush decks the option to go first and just start pounding the pressure in. Not a lot of decks can really keep up with a first turn Greyjoy. I mean, like, literally, you can go back to the stream and you can watch Dustin, you can watch Andras. If you were at Gen Con, you can watch that. You could have watched that of just like roll people with a first turn Greyjoy or set up to Greyjoy. This because of his Intimidate keyword, which of course allows you to kneel a character at the end of the challenge by the amount of strength that you won. And of course, his reaction after you win a military challenge in which Greyjoy number is attacking, if there are fewer than 3 plot cards in your use pile, stand him. So you get that, open that military challenge, or even oftentimes actually Greyjoy makes sense as your second challenge, so that you can really get his Intimidate. But sometimes you can open depending on how early it is. And it lets you take advantage of things like Winter is Coming early to turn that into a 2-claim plot that can, the military challenge into a 2-claim plot, clears out their board of Chuds to block your challenges, and kneels their best character, opening up your intrigue or your power for some more unopposed, for some more power for yourself. And it can also power the cheekiest card that's in here, which is Put to the Sword. After you win a challenge by 5 or more strength, as the attacking player, choose a location controlled by the losing opponent, discard it from play. This gives you good options against like Martell, any of the 4-cost location decks. So Martell, other Stark decks that are running Winterfell, Hightower in Tyrell, and the Wall. Either one of the walls. It's not difficult early on to hit the 6-cost wall with this. The 6-cost wall can give a lot of trouble to these kind of Stark decks, and is just extremely powerful. And again, it's put in with things like Sansa, and of course, your agenda gives you the opportunity to, if you really need to get your Put to the Torch off, you can make your military challenge the 3rd one. Very strong. Let's take a look at the plots here. So the plot, there's some things I really like about Dustin's plots. It's got some pretty standard Stark Rush plots. It's got Time of Plenty, very solid opener or middle of the game plot to refill your hand and have plenty of gold. It's got Forced March, which is such a huge tempo play for Stark. It's actually pretty broken. It's actually one of my least favorite things about current Stark is its ability to run Forced March alongside, of course, Rob, and the easy stand of Wyman, which is just brutal. It has Breaking Ties, which gives good initiative, and of course, again, the ability to return defenders, the ability to sacrifice characters to power Rob. Breaking Ties is extremely strong and Stark, and has high initiative, of course, and pretty solid gold. And of course, the 4 reserve doesn't mean much because this deck wants to win no later than turn 3, but preferably turn 2. Very strong card, and it of course gives this deck some additional action later in the game if the game does stall out. It's running King in the North, and of course 2x Wolf King. King in the North, of course, the deck doesn't need King. It can win on a turn that it King in the North without the Wolf King, thanks to the Renown. Lots of stuff, and of course, I Am No One is really powerful on a King in the North turn, even if you don't have the Wolf King. So because of course the level of interaction of events that can happen in King of the North is really powerful. So I Am No Oneing a Sansa on a King of the North turn, you can still get that intrigue. You can still get, that insight. You can still get that renown if you have Septim Mordain. Like, it's actually really impressive how much of the Stark package is passive and gets through King of the North. Arya gets through King of the North, her gaining military icon and her stealth. Bolton Flair's Forced Interrupt does. Catelyn's ability does, if for some reason your opponent has a king in play. Greyjoy's Intimidate. Both Maester Luwin and Septim Mordain's things. Blackfish's ability of House Tully characters. Very, very few things actually in the deck, like Ward which we'll get to Ward in a little bit, is all really, really, really strong. On a King of the North turn, even if you have to flip it, like say against a Builders player or against a Martell player on a turn when you don't have the Wolf King. But it's running the Wolf King, of course, to make sure that you can aggressively King in the North, not just as a Hail Mary, save yourself play. It's got Valor Morghulis. I like rush decks with... this deck is just ridiculously fast. I don't know how many games Andros and Dustin Valored people on, but I like Valor as an out for decks, particularly like against Targaryen or like a double reset world, maybe even against some Tyrell decks that might Valor you aggressively early, and then you can Valor them in return because they're not expecting you to have it. And Morghulis is very good for that. I think much better than Valor Dohaeris. You'd much rather, since you have so many duplicates, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 characters that you're running 3x, more that you're running 2x. There's plenty of dupes. Leveraging those dupes is much better for you than Dohaeris. In fact, Dohaeris is one of the good answers to this deck, which we'll get to. So there's some interesting inclusions, and we're going to start here. Summer Harvest. This is probably this is something I said on stream. Summer Harvest is extremely greedy. Right now, because of its income of 0. I don't like Summer Harvest. I understand why it's here. It gives you just explosive turns. You can see that in several games that Andros and Dustin played, where you can just, your opponent, these days people are open. I think it was Andros playing Jess Thompson, where Jess had a very solid board, a decent hand, but she needed to open a big gold plot. Andros slapped Summer Harvest down. He got 11 gold to Jess's 9, and with this deck, as greedy as it is, it needs that gold and can just blow people out. Of course, Summer Harvest is really weak to lower gold impactful plots. And we saw this actually in a cut game. Sean Bohan, who was King of Swiss at U.S. Nationals, he had to open Summer Harvest against Matt Phillips, I believe, who was playing Barra Rose Cohort. And his opener was Peace and Prosperity, which is 2 gold. And Summer Harvest, that means that this greedy Marine deck only had 4 gold available to it, while Peace and Prosperity gave them... gave Matt a huge economy advantage. So Summer Harvest can get punished. Things like, of course, Riddle, which is out there in the meta as part of a package of cards alongside at Prince Doran's Bequest. So I don't like Summer Harvest. I haven't liked it since it was printed. But now we are in a Summer Harvest meta in which this deck punishes greedy mid-range decks like Tyrell, like other Stark, like AJ Valet's Stark deck, by out-greeding them. So it's like, you're opening a 9 gold plot, you're opening a 10 gold plot in the form of either Late Summer Feast, or trading. Well, I'm going to out-greed you by getting an additional 2 gold and 4 initiative, so I get to set the tempo of the turn, and it's 6 reserve. Really strong. really, it can backfire on you, but right now, greed is good, and this deck is even greedier. You see that greed, again, in the fact that it's running things like Ward, which is 4 gold. To afford Ward, you need things like Summer Harvest. This is a huge tempo hit for a rush deck, but it can definitely blow people out, as you saw if you can watch the U.S. National stream. What else? And then let's also look at this deck and see how greedy it is in general. There are how many 6-cost characters? There's 1, 2, 3, 4 6-cost characters. And then if we throw Greyjoy at 5, that makes you super vulnerable to Valor Harris. And of course, the economy here, with some Great Halls, some Northern Armory, some Rose Roads, you don't necessarily, you need to be able to have things like Summer Harvest and Time of Plenty, which is probably Harvest Plenty or Plenty Harvest is probably the safest opener with this. It's possible to catch this deck off guard by punishing its greed. So we'll get to sort of where I think a deck that can punish its greed will be there. Because I think it's a really smart strategy with this deck, and where we start crossing this right now. Again, we're in a greedy meta. We've got Tyrell, that's just so gold hungry. We have Drown God, which is extremely gold hungry. Martell, Wars to Come, which is actually remarkably gold hungry, and because it's got to play these 6-cost Intimidate bodies and all kinds of stuff. And some, like Fred Bird's list, I think, was running the 7-cost Arion. Like, these are, it's also gold hungry. So we're going to go above them. We're going to out-greed them. Also, the greed helps in the mirror against other rush decks. So one of the advantages that Stark, the Storm Bros build has, and of course the Ebri, Woodard, Carpenter build that's now up here from the Gen Con runner-up, is you can out-greed them. I actually prefer a little bit more closer to my play style is the Woodard Gen Con runner-up build. It's a little lower to the ground. It's running some plots like Withering Cold, which is super good with Rob. It's running Hands on Spikes. That's one of the more interesting decisions that Andras and Dustin made and Stone Bros made, was to not run Heads on Spikes. I like that here, actually. I think if you're going to go the hyper greedy route like they did, that cutting heads is really the smart move. Because you need to make room for Summer Harvest. You need to make room for Time of Plenty. Oh, and they're running Storm of Swords. I missed Storm of Swords. Storm of Swords, this, of course, gives them the option of, particularly with this boy, where is he? Greyjoy Umber. Greyjoy Umber doesn't have a limit. So if you open something like Summer Harvest, get it for 11 gold, 12 gold, or you set up Greyjoy Umber and you can get a decent board going, he could do 2 Intimidate military challenges where he's standing on turn 2 or turn 3. Really, really strong. So they're specifically a little bit in on Greyjoy, which I, as having played against Andras at New Jersey, is a very good strategy in this current meta. So very impressive. Impressive build. I still prefer a little bit myself the Gen Con runner-up build because it's lower to the ground. It's running just a slightly lower curve. It's running Daisy, which I really like in these builds. It's running like OSHA. It's a little less all in. It's got some passing the gate to smooth out the economy. It's got so it's not running Ward. It's lower to the ground, and I like that a lot. It's got Mage for some additional card draw, and she's super expendable. And it's running things like Varys' Riddle, which can be really good against Martell. It's still got its own King in the North. It's running Political Disaster, Answer Locations, and of course is running Heads. So the options you really have if you're playing Starcross is you can either go Greed. Greed is good. Right here in the form of the Storm Bro Speed build, which I think was very well positioned for the Nationals meta, and I think is going to be pretty well positioned going forward. Because of course, if you can all crossing decks are fundamentally greedy the way they're built, except for things like Jim Henson's deck. the plan here is people can either go under in the form like Jim does and go super cheap, super low to the ground, those sort of greedy, the Tyrell, the Targ crossing builds. Or you can go over. You can just be, I'm going to outgreed you. We're going to go toe-to-toe for greed and just playing expensive, big 6-cost characters. This deck, built by Andras and Andras and Dustin and the Storm Bros, this deck goes over. It says, we're going to go outgreed. And you saw that, actually, against AJ, where he overpowered AJ's Stark Fealty. I think Andras beat Sandy, who was playing Stark Crossing. It's just like you could just see him smash these other crossing decks because it's more powerful. It's packing even more of a punch. And then, of course, if you're the going under approach is here for the Woodard deck and the Ibri deck here. I, again, prefer a little bit. I think its economy base is a little more stable than Andras's and Dustin's build, the Storm Bros build. But both decks are really good and definitely massive force you need to be prepared for in the meta. So how do you beat this deck? Okay, so number one, you could play a strategy that goes under them in the form of something like Jim Henson's Night's Watch decks, fast deck. You can attrition them out. I actually think that New Wall decks are very strong against these Stark Crossing decks because Mutiny at Craster's Keep is really powerful against them. The ability to steal Rob, like if you could steal one of their key pieces like Rob, Greatjon, or Wyman, they're out. They don't have a lot of way to come back from behind. And I actually think that Woodard's deck here is even more vulnerable to that, although it has Political Disaster to get around New Wall. This at least has Valar Morghulis, which you can kill your own characters here. If you can kill one of their... of course, neither of these decks are running Cross Call. So if you could kill one of their critical characters, particularly Rob or Wyman, you are in good shape. That's one option. I definitely think this deck, that New Wall, has actually a pretty solid matchup against Stark Crossing, particularly if it's running something like this plot, Uneasy Truce. So I think your average deck, though, really is going to want to up its plot game. Uneasy Truce. This is a brand new plot, so I'm definitely going to read it. It says it's 4 income, 5 initiative, 1 claim, reserve 5. It's an edict. Each player cannot gain power for his or her faction card except during challenges. Forced reaction: after a challenge initiated, move 1 power from the attacking player's faction card to the defending player's faction card. So what this basically means is your opponent has to pay 1 power for every challenge they initiate. This is super disastrous for a lot of crossing decks. And not all, even good crossing players, I don't think have figured out how to play around this. It often forces them, and they probably is the right play, to take a turn off. And that gives you so much breathing room. This is a deck that allows things like Mace decks, Drowned God decks to get a turn to take a time off, to build up itself, to really defend. Of course, it turns like a power challenge into a wash. They give you a power, you give them a power back. It turns military and intrigue challenges into time for you to get power. Of course, that can backfire occasionally. They can do things like Winter is Coming to get additional power off you, but most of the time, this is going to not allow them to win. I have actually seen several games both online and in real life where Uneasy Truce has just stopped a crossing player from going to 15 on a turn, and because they had to give up 2 power to initiate all 3 of their challenges, allowing a Drowned God player to catch up and win the game. So really strong. And same with Mace. And allow Mace decks to get in testing. This is super good at Mace decks. So if your deck has... I wouldn't be surprised also to see this in Martell Wars decks over time. Like, as crossing decks, particularly these Stark crossing decks, become bigger in the meta, we're going to see more Uneasy Truce. Because I think the Storm Bros build is a little bit more vulnerable because it only has the 3 native instances of renown, 1, 2, 3 native instances of renown, 4 with Sansa. I think the Gen Con runner-up deck has a little bit more oomph in it in the form of Renown, because of course Renown can overwhelm Uneasy Truce. So yeah, okay, I give you power, but I have 3 Renown bodies. Tyrell has good play around this, but Tyrell Rush. But I think particularly Storm Bros, Uneasy Truce is pretty bad for them. Of course, your king commands it. The classic anti-rush plot. It's a 6/1/1. Each non-king, non-queen character cannot gain power. This means that only their character with the Wolf King on it can claim power. This can buy you additional time if Rob is running over things with you, or they get that Sansa play with Septa Mordain out. Again, just gives you a little bit more breathing room. It has the advantage, of course, having 6 gold. I really like your king commands it. In general, in the meta right now, it helps against Mace. It helps against Drown God. It just is very good. Plot in general, and it's really strong against Rush. All right, so there are 2 decks that I could recommend that you would play. One would be New Wall. There's not a published New Wall list that someone has had success with, so I can't recommend it. But I can recommend this Winner of German Nationals deck. Why do I like this? Okay. I like this deck because I think it has some really powerful tools to punish the Stark Crossing deck. Well, not punish it, but to exploit its weaknesses. So first, it has... First off, Greyjoy has an amazing tool against Stark, which is Drown God Fanatic. Drown God Fanatic is... So this was piloted to German Nationals. Beat my good friend David, who was playing Drown God in the finals. So, but anyway, Drown God Fanatic, extremely strong against all factions, but particularly Stark. Canceling Rob's trigger is super useful against these rush decks. Canceling Wyman's, not his sacrifice. Come on, guys. Pro play tip here. If you're playing Drown God Fanatic, do not cancel the 75% of contexts. Do not cancel the Wyman sacrifice trigger. Cancel the Wyman stand trigger, okay? Or cancel the Rob trigger. The ability to cancel those crucial triggers, really powerful. Canceling Summer, really powerful. Punish people for relying on those character abilities. Drown God Fanatic is great against Stark. But also this deck, with its 3 Ashas, 3 Balon Greyjoys, Vic, the old Vic, not the new Vic that just came out, it can go toe-to-toe in the greed level with Stark. It's also running Seastone Chair, which can allow you early on to pick off those key characters that Stark has. So it can go with greed. It can blow up their stand economy with newly made lords, or we do not sows. It's running Pay the Iron Price to hit those wards, or Wolf Kings, which is just, I think, really funny. But of course, I believe Wolf King, it's actually Stark character only. It is Stark character only. Sad panda. But you can still hit those wards. Ugh, hitting wards are great. Its economy, I think, is actually a little bit more stable, actually. It has saves, so you can aggressively Valor. Again, something that that you can definitely see Stark decks not being able to come back from. Stark, it's got Hagen's Daughter in the form of Infinite Claim Soak. It's got Euron to just sort of 3 challenges with icons. It has some stealth in the form of Asha. It has its own king plan. This version is not running... It's not running King in the North, but it has an answer in the form of this Balon to King in the North. It's got Nothing Burns with the Cold to whack their non-limited economy and whack their stands. It's got its own Forced March. It has Weapons at the Door to, if you can time Weapons at the Door with their King in the North turn and pop the Wolf King back to their hand in the challenges phase, super strong for you. Turn off their Rob triggers, turn off their Wyman triggers that turn. What they thought was aggressive, it's got a 2-game plot. To sort of apply additional pressure. I actually think that... and of course it has 3-cost Theon, who's super good with Seastone Chair, and is just really, really strong against Stark. This deck is flexible enough to have some really strong answers to Stark. I will say that the Storm Bros have some tools in the forms of these very cheeky put to the torches to blow up things like the Seastone Chair, to blow up an Iron Victory or a Great Kraken, or hit an Iron Mines. All very strong. But I think that in the greed game, I think Greyjoy almost always wins. One, particularly because Greyjoy has 2 Tricons that cost 7 and can back up its strong characters with Drown God Fanatics. So I think if you're really worried about, and of course it's running crossing on its own, so it has speed itself. So I'm sorry I missed that. So it has its own speed as well. I think that if there's any faction that can go toe-to-toe with Stark in this greedy, rushy meta, it's this kind of build of Greyjoy. So if you are overrun with your meta, I would definitely expect to check out this German-winning spicy Greyjoy good stuff. It won German Nats in 2018. It's really great. It has a great outs against our friends, the Storm Bros deck. It has some great outs against the Gen Con runner-up deck. So it's just a really strong deck. And a very good meta answer for right now. So that brings us to the end of this episode. Please leave any comments about this video, about Stark Crossing. I may actually just return to Stark and make the Stark cohort video next, or I'll take other recommendations that people want to hear. I could return to my starting as a competitive player series. So whatever you're interested in, I'm up for doing. I'll probably be doing one of these videos once a week or once every other week, depending on my schedule. So I think I have a hole in my schedule to record another one next week. If not, it'll be the week after. So again, thank you for watching, and I hope you found this informative. Let me know what you thought in the comments, and make sure you watch The Second Sons and listen to the White Book. See you later.